So it's always difficult to find something more to talk about. So I was just asking the fellow monk here, what should I talk about? And just as I sat down to meditate, I thought, oh no, I'll just wait for inspiration to arise. And I thought, aha, that's the talk for this evening. Inspiration. And I'll just give you an idea of how these processes of how you choose the talks come. You get a nice subject. And inspiration is a very beautiful subject, because certainly that runs my life. And hopefully that you can make it more important in your life as well. Because inspiration is this beautiful feeling inside of you which raises your game, which makes you speak and act in a way which is higher than the normal person. In other words, it makes you do some things which you wonder afterwards, how on earth could I have done that? What a beautiful thing it is. And it's those acts of body and speech which actually spread that inspiration to others and make this world such a beautiful, wonderful place. Without inspiration, without inspiring acts, this world would just be just a whole bundle of despair. Just people just being selfish, just looking after themselves and doing nothing which is way above the expected normal. And I've always found inspiration to be one of the most important parts of the spiritual life, because it's hard to raise your game up and to be kind, to be generous and to be loving, to be forgiving. It's such a difficult thing to do when you don't have any examples. But every now and again you come across stories which you see yourself or you hear from other people, authentic examples of acts of just great generosity and kindness which just move your heart and make this world a beautiful place, and also encourage you to add your acts of beauty to this world. And if anybody wants to know a meaning of life, that's a pretty good meaning of life. To add beauty to this world by your inspiring acts of body and speech. To do something every now and again which is way above the normal, way above the expected. And why do you do that? You can't think to do the inspiration. Which is why, as a monk, by meditating and calming that thinking mind, you open the opportunity for inspiration. Because inspiration is irrational, it's illogical. Sometimes you do these things and people say, that doesn't make any sense. And I say, I agree it doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to do it anyway. Why? Because my goodness, it feels good. It feels a wonderful thing to do. Like even becoming a monk in the first place is a totally stupid thing to do. It's a crazy, crazy idea. But I was just so inspired to do this. Let go of the whole world and let go of all my hair. And I did have a lot of hair before I became a monk. Not just hair, I also had a beard as well. As many of you may know, I used to call it the donut look, because where my curly hair finished, that's where my beard started. And I could just peer through the middle, like in a donut. And it was actually very practical in a place like England. For those of you who've been looking at the news, how cold it is over there, that's the best way of keeping warm. However, that didn't really work when you went to a place like Thailand. But I was inspired to do this, and inspired to go and live in a place which was physically just so tough. I mentioned all the stories about, sometimes it was so hot, when you went to sleep at night, you just, you have your lower robe on, but the top was totally bare, and there were tarantulas on the ceiling. Big spiders, this is true. And every now and again, they drop on the ceiling onto your bare chest. And they'd crawl all over you. And these were real tarantulas. But I was inspired. Actually, I quite liked them. They were sort of tickly. You weren't afraid of these things. You were just inspired. Inspired because you were doing a good thing, and you were being kind to all these animals. So, of course, the animals would always be kind to you. And there was an inspiration there to let these animals in this forest just be. Even though sometimes people would say, no, they're dangerous, you should, get some medicine so you don't get malaria, or get some medicine so in case the snakes bite you, that they can get something to counteract their venom. But I don't know, a lot of times I was just running an inspiration. If you're kind to these animals, they'll be kind to you. Totally illogical, but it worked. And of course, there's many of those snake stories. I'm going into snake stories now. Many of those snake stories about them crawling up your back. I remember this one monk, we were doing some chanting, and he was doing the main chanting, and a snake crawled up his back, just on his right side, because I was watching this. And the snake, his head came just above his shoulder, and the monk looked around, and the snake looked around, and they were eyeballing each other. And it was just so funny. I think I laughed, because he's too big. And of course, the monk was a kind monk, so just very gently, he pushed his robe over so the snake could go down and go somewhere else. And many times, like the time when, well, I love this story, I think I usually tell this on retreats, but you know that sometimes in some of these Buddhist rituals, you know that we have holy water in Buddhism. You know, sometimes you come on a Saturday or Sunday, if you want to be sprinkled, I'll sprinkle anybody, just with a bit of holy water. But that was happening in Thailand as well. But on one morning, I'd been meditating all night, not sleeping at all. And in the early morning, I had to go out to go to the toilet. But this was in the forest. This was in the bush, in the jungle of Thailand. So I went up. You don't go into the toilet, you just urinate in the forest. So I squatted down to urinate. And it was, number one, my mindfulness wasn't very strong, because I'd been meditating all night, I hadn't slept. And number two, it was just at dawn, so the light wasn't very strong. So as I squatted down to urinate, I thought, to all intents and purposes, it looked like I was urinating on a stick, until the stick started to move. I was peeing on a snake. And I often tell this, because this is especially for the men. Some of you girls, you just can't really get your heads around this, but the most sensitive part of a man's body was only a couple of inches from the mouth of this venomous snake. And of course it never bit me. And of course it wouldn't bite you. Why? Because it thought it was being blessed by holy water. You can't get more holy than the urine from a monk. But because that you love these animals, even the snakes. I was talking to a monk that had a lot of empathy for these snakes, and at one time just stepping on a snake, and I jumped one way in a hut, not very far to go. I jumped one way, the snake jumped another way. We looked at each other. You don't need to read minds to know that poor snake was terrified, and so was I. And so I said sorry, and you can see from the snake said, "I've got no harm for you. I've got no harm for you." So the snake very quickly calmed down and went another way, and I went another way. And it's just so easy, when you have kindness. And so a lot of the times you may think, what a dangerous place that was, or what a stupid thing it was to live in such a place and walk around without sandals. Never mind, it was inspiration which was running me. And all of the difficult times which you had, eating terrible food and getting sick and having no physical comforts at all. It was such an inspiring time to live so simply with so few possessions. And people who come and see you, a few people visit, were wondering, how on earth can you live like that? And it was true that my physical comfort was almost nil. No food which I liked to eat, usually always gave me stomachache or usually diarrhea. And sleeping on the floor in a climate which I couldn't stand. But it was something about that lifestyle of simplicity. It was so inspiring, and it motivated me so much. What a wonderful lifestyle it is to go against everything which I was used to in my life before. and go and just sleep on the floor and have hardly nothing to my name. Why do that? It was only because something inside me said, this is a beautiful thing to do. It's a wonderful act to do. And it was. I couldn't put it into words. I couldn't sort of explain to my friends. So what the heck are you doing that for? Why are you living like that? But to me, the days went by, the months, the years went by, and there was a lot of peace and happiness. It was inspiring for me to learn how to little things, let go of possessions and live so simply. And in this day and age, sometimes it's so hard for us to live simply if we just follow our thoughts and our reasons of all the stuff which you have in your house. And why do you need so much stuff? Oh, just in case. No, how about being inspired and say, I'm going to throw it all out. If you start thinking about it, you think, oh my goodness, I can't do that, it's important. Inspiration is the complete opposite of thinking. Inspiration is there's something deep inside you, some wisdom, some kindness, some deep understanding which tells you to stop the thinking and just do it because it feels good. And that's what's run my life. And it's the same when in your relationships, that sometimes, you always have arguments and you have fallout with your friends, and that's just part of life. And of course, what happens when we get angry at each other is, I can't forgive him, no way can I forgive her, she's got to forgive me, ask forgiveness first. But inspiration does something different. Inspiration says, well, it doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong. What inspiration means is just, I'm going to say sorry just because it's a beautiful thing to do. And it comes from the heart, never from the head. And there's been occasions which I'm sure that you've seen in your own life, or you've heard about, when there's somebody, there's no way that they deserve what they've received, but still they come and say, I forgive you. I told this story a long time ago about a man who had an accident in a mine in the north of Western Australia. He was working at night setting the explosives in the rock face. He was working alone because it was the only safe thing to do. This was years ago before they had so many other safety measures. But unfortunately, the person on the last shift had not put the brake on properly on one of the ore carts. And he heard the cart coming down the slope towards him. And it was going to crash against a wall where he was working. And there was no escape. No place to go. He jumped, and the cart cut off one of his legs. And he was there for hours apparently, just bleeding. He was supposed to be in pain, but actually the opposite happened. He had one of these amazing spiritual experiences, as sometimes people have. In the morning they found him, took him to hospital. He survived. But it was one of those times, the unexpected, the inspiration that it was all right. Maybe whenever we're getting these situations, unexpected, traumatic, we do have a choice. I was saying to somebody just earlier, everything which happens to you in life, you have a choice. To go on the path of fear, to go on the path of anger and blame, or you've got another choice. And it's inspiration gives you that other choice. To take that situation and use it for some different way of looking at the whole of life. People do have those spiritual experiences. They call it spiritual experience because you start to see the world in a totally different way, and very unexpected, in a beautiful way. I'm not quite sure what he felt then, but he was so much at peace, even with his leg torn off. And of course, later on, when that man who was responsible came up to him to say sorry, sorry for being heedless and being the cause of you losing your leg, this man said, no, you don't need to say sorry. Of course I forgive, there's nothing wrong there. Sometimes those acts of forgiveness even when you've lost your leg, and you can forgive the person responsible. You see things like that, and it raises up your heart to see, my goodness, how can you do that? And if that person can do that, maybe I can do that. Maybe someone has been responsible, for your pain or suffering, or whatever it is which has caused you irritation. And it is their fault, you know it's their fault, but nevertheless, you don't wait for them to say sorry to you. You say sorry to them. I forgive you. Please forgive me. There's something about that which moves me, because I've seen that. It used to be a ceremony which we would do every year, at least once a year, in traditional Thailand. It doesn't happen these days. Usually at the New Year festival, which is in April, it's the Indian New Year. It's celebrated in Sri Lanka, in Burma, around April the 13th, 14th and 15th. At that time it used to be the custom that a husband and wife would meet together, and that day they'd ask forgiveness of each other. They'd say sorry. Whatever we've done in the last 12 months which has irritated you, things which I should have done, which I didn't do, which has caused you pain, I sincerely say sorry for that. It doesn't matter who says it first. It's said, and it's respected so much, the other person says, of course I forgive you. Which means once every 12 months, the people living together can wipe the slate clean and can stop holding all these bad feelings, which when they build up over many, many years of a relationship, can cause a cancer in the heart which will kill that relationship and mean you can't live with each other anymore. And I've seen this because people do come up to me when they're having problems with their relationships, and this is something which always hits me when people have trouble living together, because I've known both of you for such a long time. Both of you are such good people, and I can't figure out that she's a good person, he's a good person. Why on earth can't you live together? You're both good people. And you are both good people, because you can't forgive. And sometimes it's gone on too long that you can't forgive. But every now and again people do get inspired. And that inspiration, it doesn't make any sense. You may think, no, I shouldn't really do this. If I forgive him, he's going to do the same again. If I let her get away with this, who knows what she's going to do next. Stop thinking logically and reasonably, because inspiration goes in a different direction. And it mends the heart, not the head, but the heart, which is what spirituality is all about. And not only that, the inspiration just gives a beautiful flavour to this world when you do see inspiring acts of kindness and generosity, because sometimes there's no reason for a person to help someone they don't even know. But they do it nevertheless. An example of that, there's one of our nuns, one of the bhikkhunis over at Dharmasara, and just before she became a bhikkhuni, or before she became a 10-precept nun rather, she had to give away all her worldly possessions, because as a monk you don't have anything. As a nun you don't have anything. I keep on saying that's why they're called nuns. A terrible joke. But anyway, that wasn't from inspiration, that joke, that was from desperation. But she literally she went to the bank to clean out her account. She'd given a donation to the Buddhist Society, she had some money left, and there was a fellow outside, I think, collecting for the Salvation Army or something, or Red Cross, I forget what it was, St. John's Ambulance. It could have been St. John's Ambulance. And she had a couple of $1,000. She just put it in the tin. And this person couldn't believe, because usually when you're collecting money in a tin, you maybe get a couple of dollars, maybe 20 cents if and just little coins, and this was a couple of thousand. And the guy couldn't believe this. And what happened next is the karma is always sort of interlaced. There's always some connection with these things. That was just a couple of weeks before we had our big ceremony, a 30th anniversary in Supreme Court Gardens. And being a big ceremony, and it's on the Waisak night, on May, we had to have security guards. And who was actually working a security guard? But the guy who received this couple of $1,000. And he came up to me and he said, I was crying, because I'd never seen such an inspiring gift before. And it just happened he came to be a security guard at our event a few days later. And things like that really mean something. A few years later, when we held our the fourth global conference on Buddhism at the convention center here, the Buddhist Society, we ran this convention. And of course, being a conference, you have catering. But one of our monks, I don't know if he's here this evening, because he disrobed later on, but one of our monks, instead of having the meal, which was a really fine meal made by great chefs, he thought, no, I'm in Perth, I'm a monk. He took his bowl and just went on arms round through the streets of Perth. No one expected him. And he didn't know where he was going to get any food. He just walked, a monk with his bowl, in a western city. And he got plenty of food, but what really inspired him was one of the homeless men. People who sleep out, or maybe if they're lucky to find a refuge to stay the night, had a sandwich which he was given, and he put the sandwich in the monk's bowl. And when the monk received this sandwich from a person who had even less than he did, that moved him so much. But why is it that people who are so poor, they don't even have a place to sleep at night, still have that inspiration to be kind and generous and just put a sandwich in the bowl of a monk who is just walking peacefully down the road? That sort of moved him so much. And when he told the story, it moved me as well. Because I have been so fortunate to also witness such great acts of kindness and generosity. And also in my own way made those acts of generosity which have been totally irrational. Sometimes that people have been in trouble. And you just stop what you're doing and just help them. I remember once getting into trouble the first year I was here. There was a girl who was in big trouble. She just stabbed her mother-in-law, and she was in hospital. And this girl was at the airport trying to get back to Thailand. And of course, I was one of the only people who could talk to her. So I went there straight away to talk to her. I was talking to her for hours, took her to the hospital, because she was going a bit crazy, to get her admitted, and spent about 5 or 6, 7 hours with her, I forget which. And I missed my lunch, and so I got into big trouble for the people who come to feed me that day, and I couldn't actually be with them. But who cares about missing a lunch when you can help somebody? And I would do that, you would do that, I'd hope. It doesn't matter how tired you are or how hungry you are. You just do it. Why? Because it needs to be done. It's irrational, but you just do it. And I've just seen just other great acts of kindness and generosity from many of the people who come here. But look at our centre here, look at our monastery at Gidji Ganap. You all know how that monastery started at Gidji Ganap. It was one of those inspiring stories. We wanted to have a nuns monastery, a place for women in Buddhism. So what did? We'd go looking around for some land, and I must admit that some of the committee members, they were a bit too practical. As for me, I'm into inspiration. So I looked at this 30-acre block up in Gidji Ganap. And as we went to look at it, we passed this sign, 600 acres of paradise. I remember that sign. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And they said, we can't afford 600 acres. Come on, be real. And so we saw this 30-acre block, and it was just, it was okay, it was land, but it wasn't sort of the stuff which really moves you. And on the way back I say, I want to go and see this land. He said, you can't. I said, I want to. Said, it's impossible. Said, take me. So we saw it, and we rang up. And of course, that's the land we eventually got. Totally sort of out of our range, but who cares? I think one of the reasons we could even get close to it was when people find out that we were going to do something inspiring, like a monastery for women, just for women, not part of our monks' monastery, but just for women. The word got around, and this man, I don't think I've seen him again. He came to see me at Bodhinyana Monastery. He wanted to make a donation for the nuns' monastery. He wanted to make a donation because he just had his first child, a girl. And he said, I want to do something out of celebration for my first child. It's a girl. Who knows? Maybe one day she might want to be a Buddhist nun. So I want to make that possible for her. And he wrote out a check for $250,000. And that blew me away. I'd never seen at that time a check that big before. And that's the sort of thing where we get these monasteries from, where we get these buildings from, where we get this place from. So no way can we afford it. Who cares? Let's just do it and see what happens next. So in your life, this is just the way we work. In your life, please take the inspiring choice whenever it arises. And don't think, oh, this is impossible, this is not going to work, this is not right. Even if you start a business, if it's business to make money, yeah, it won't work. But if it's a business to help people, to do something, to really be, add something to our society, it doesn't matter just how impossible it is. Just do it. And be inspired by the fact that in this universe, if you're doing something wonderful and good, there's always forces which are behind you, which help you along the way and bring it somehow or other to a fruition. For even more recently, our meditation retreat centre down at opposite our monastery, this beautiful resource which is for you. And for I don't know how many years I worked my butt off for that place, just trying to raise money. And of course it's a stupid impossible. It cost over $5 million. How can we get $5 million? I don't know. Let's just go and do it and see what happens. And of course now those of you who go down there, you see this beautiful retreat centre. And of course, those of you who remember its opening last year, even the builder was saying, no, we've got to put off the opening ceremony. And all the committee, actually not all of you, some of you have learned inspiration over these years. Some of you were saying, Ajahn Brahm, we're opening on this, the day before Good Friday for the Easter retreat. And there was so much building work to be done. And people were saying, you're never going to get it finished, you're never going to get finished. I said, have you got a plan B? And I said, yes, I do have a plan B, in case it's not finished. And that's the same as plan A. It's going to be finished. And of course it was finished. That was one of the most inspiring things about the whole event. If you really put your heart into it, and you sort of believe in it, and you follow inspiration, it was totally irrational to get that thing finished. And of course the monks were up to about 2-3 o'clock in the morning, a couple of nights in a row, just finishing off the floor, and everybody helping out to make sure it gets finished, and it worked. And that was one of the best things about that centre, just how it was built. In all of the things in life, okay, we can actually build this centre and build it really well. And you think that this is the building, is the centre here. Or you look at the bricks and the roof, and that's our meditation centre. That's not our meditation centre. No, if you ever go to our nuns' monastery, the cottages, the kutis, that's not the monastery. It's how it was built, where it came from. The whole process by which that came into being, that's the monastery. That's the centre. Because that was the inspiration which brought it into fruition. And those of you who were part of that and saw how it all came together, illogically, totally impossible, but for many, many people, sort of working, giving, being kind, lending a hand, these things actually come together. And I mention this because so often in our present world, whether it's climate change, whether it's problems in sort of earthquakes in Haiti, whether it's global crashes, whether it's crime or violence, so many times that we forget the important ingredient that these problems can be solved if we have inspiration. If we can somehow just forget about the thoughts which create too much negativity and make life impossible. Because if you think about it, it's impossible. How on earth are you going to get all these nations to work together? And if you think about the cost, it's never going to happen. But with inspiration, you can do anything. Anything can happen when people actually just put aside all the negativity and all the reasons why not, and just say, let's make it happen. Some years ago, just 2 years ago, I went to this high-power conference. This is on global warming. This high-power conference in Hayman Island on the Great Barrier Reef. And it was attended by Kevin Rudd, Wayne Swan, Julia Gillard, and all these heads of business. And one of the panels which I attended, it was a very, very wonderful way of looking at a problem. The panel of all these experts from over the world was saying, it's not a case of how are we going to cut the emissions. It's a case of we have to. How are we going to get there? So it wasn't actually from where we are now looking at how we're going to get to some goal in the future. It was actually saying we're at this goal. Just imagine we've cut the global carbon emissions to zero, because we have to. How do we get there? And so it's not working from where we are to where we want to go. It's starting from where we want to go and figuring out how to get there. And I thought that was an inspirational idea. And once you started from that, they had all these solutions, and brilliant solutions. A lot of time it's just the way we couch the questions. And inspiration actually turns the whole thing around, and we see things in a totally different light. It's not sort of how or why we should forgive that person we're angry about. It's look, we've forgiven them, we're together again. How do we get there? So it's looking at things from a totally different way and creating different solutions. Solutions which most people would not be able to think possible, but they are possible and they do work. You know, that was one of the roles of religion in the olden days. The roles of religion would be to see things in a very different perspective. But a problem with religions, they became just so solidified, like ossified, like the old trees which would actually move backwards and forwards, which were alive and growing. And now they became like fossils, just if you go to the pinnacles, just hard rocks which were once alive trees. And sometimes I think that's what religion has become, just fossilized, stiff, unbending, where once it was something alive, drawing sort of this essence and moisture from the soil of truth and love and wisdom. And now it's got solidified. And I think it's the great thing about spirituality, real religion, where it all comes from, it actually does draw on something so basic, like the love, the emotions, the positive emotions like love and truth and peace and forgiveness, which when we have those selfless emotions and we draw on that, that is like the sap of the tree of real religion. When we can actually draw on that, we're alive, we can grow. I don't think there's any problem we can't solve. Why? Because we're coming from a place of peace and truth and compassion, freedom, the thing which moves every human being. Okay, this is Australia, but I give talks all over the world, and it doesn't matter where you give a talk, when you talk about such things, you resonate with everybody, and it's not just talks to Buddhists, you talk to Christians and goodness knows who else. And these ideas resonate because you're going at the heart of things. As I said some years ago, the contents rather than the container. Too often that people just look at the container of religions rather than the content. They look at the books, not what the books say. They look at the images rather than what the images mean. They look at a monk rather than what the monk actually says or does even. And the doing is more important than the words. So we look at the contents rather than the containers. Not the images, not the packaging, but what's actually inside of it. And too often just people don't even look at the contents. They look at the packaging. We believe in the Bible, but they don't actually look what's inside of it. I'm a Theravada Buddhist, but what actually is that? Look inside of it. And if you look inside of it, and you get rid of all of the packaging, and you find out all drawing on the same peace and kindness and love and truth. And that's what I call like the sap which makes religions grow. And when that dries up, of course, religions get ossified. They just become these big stone monoliths which get in the way of people finding truth. It's one of my favourite sayings. Never allow your knowledge to stand in the way of truth. Inspiration puts aside all your knowledge, all that you've learned, all that you think should be the case. And instead of your knowledge, you go to something else, which I've called today inspiration. The sap of truth, of love, of kindness, compassion, freedom. You get into that, and from there you get this inspiration. That makes the tree alive. That makes possibilities happen, which people just couldn't see before. How much of your life so far has been totally unexpected? Could you really see your life unfolding as it has? I don't think there's anyone in this room, certainly not me, who could actually ever thought that I'd be sitting up here talking like this. I never thought I'd become a monk. And then when I did become a monk, I wanted to be a hermit. Never wanted to sort of be in front of a camera going on YouTube. That is really weird. But life just unfolds in this way. And so you just go with the inspiration. Just make the very best of it. And when you go with the inspiration, what's really happening there is you're opening up doors and possibilities which you usually can't see at the time. You just go with it and you go for it and see what happens. And if you're always coming from the right place, it always works out. And that's something which I've always trusted in. I've been put in positions where I've never been trained. I'm not competent according to the world, to be able to give talks or to counselling. I've never got any counselling qualifications. I've never done any courses in public speaking. But you still can actually go for this inspiration, go to the heart, and it's amazing just what you can achieve. There are times I work so hard, I get so tired. There are times when you wonder just how you can actually open your mouth and give a talk. That sometimes I've been travelling, I come back and jet lagged, and you come up here and you have to give a talk to so many people, and all you feel like doing is going to sleep. Sometimes there's so many people waiting for you, and you're just exhausted by all the stuff you've done so far. But I don't let that stop me talking. Instead I go to inspiration. And inspiration is a beautiful source of energy. Think of all that's beautiful and good in this world, all that's peaceful, all that's lovely, all that's amazing. And you get into that, this beautiful source of energy. How many inspiring things can you remember this week? If you really turn your mind to it, you can think of it, you can feel it, you can know it. How many inspiring things have you known in your life so far? How many inspiring things have you done? If you haven't done any yet, get into it while there's still time. Just go off and just to a sort of an old people's home or an orphanage, or just volunteer at the hospital. Do anything. Just go and do it for the sake of I'm just going to do this. It's inspiring. It's good. I know it's good. Just volunteer to a busy bee at the nuns monastery or something. It's just totally impossible. I haven't got the time. Who cares? I'm going to do it anyway. Because if you go through inspiration, then you're really touching your spiritual heart. If you just go for your logic and reason from the head, then you're missing out on life. Go and say to that person who's really hurt you, say, I respect you, I love you. Do something which is totally sort of out of what should be done, but do it because you feel it should be done. And then if you can act out of inspiration, then you are tying into this great source of spiritual energy. Again, when I'm really tired and exhausted, I just look at something inspiring, something which I've done, someone I've helped, someone I've cared for. And then straight away you get this incredible energy coming up in your mind. I'm talking about real powerful energy. Because inspiration does actually give a huge boost to your heart, to your mind, to the spiritual center of you. Inspiration is like food for the heart, as Ajahn Chah would say. And when you have that food for the heart, your heart gets really strong and fit. And it's amazing just the sorts of stuff which you can do. And there are times when people come up to you and they're in terrible situations. You think, how the heck can I help them? What can I do to serve and to solve the problem? And again, I haven't got a clue what to say, what to do, but it just make the mind peaceful, make it kind, and have inspiration that if you trust in that kindness, in that peace inside each one of you, you trust in that 100%, that something wonderful will come out. And of course, it always does. Not just for me, but for other people. One of the stories which I've been telling is there was a counsellor over in Sydney, I think she was. And she was a counsellor, and she got this call from a lady from the United States who was in a total mess. Anxiety disorder, cancer, depression, suicidal, you name it, she had it. And she wanted counselling. And straight away, you're logically enough, reasonable enough, why would a person from California want to go to a counsellor in Sydney? They got so many counsellors in California. So it must be, she thought, that all those counsellors in the United States hadn't been able to help. So she had to do things in a totally different way. So she told me that when that person came to see her, she put aside everything she'd ever learned as a professional counsellor. All the experience of what worked in the past, she totally forgot. She made her mind blank but kind. And when this lady came to see her, a mess, I think a doctor had only said only a few months left to live. Straight away, the words came out of this Sydney counsellor's mouth. I think you should start playing the violin. Now, that's not what a counsellor says when you first come into the rooms. But of course, it was spot on. The woman of the United States started weeping. The counsellor never knew why, until afterwards. She found out that this was a person from a very wealthy home in California. And when she was very young, she learned the violin and loved playing it. But when she got to a certain age, her mother says, the lady of your status in your class should not play music. And her mother stopped her doing something she loved, which was one of the reasons for her psychological tightness inside. She'd been oppressed by her mother. And this was a symbol of that oppression, not being able to do something she loved because a person in her strata of society was not supposed to do that. And so by just saying, I think you should play the violin, she was saying, I think you should just be yourself and do what you love to do and forget about what other people say you should do. Stop trying to please others. Stop trying to live up to other people's expectations. Stop being a prisoner of other people's praise or blame. Be free, be yourself. If you want to play the violin, just go for it. And the second thing she said was, I think you should go and do something for other people. What do you mean I'm dying? I haven't got time to do things for other people. I think you should. And the idea came up just to go into the burns units of the hospitals in California, just to read stories to the kids who were stuck in that burns unit, unable to meet others, just to read a story to them. And she started this little society which would go to the burns units of the Californian hospitals for kids and just take a book and read it to them, that's all. Just to give. It's not the story which was important, it's that somebody was taking the time to read to children in great pain with the terrible wounds from the burns and those many, many days of recovery. And I think she was only supposed to live for about 3 months. She lived for about 3 years. And her anxiety disappeared, and she lived a wonderful life at the end. It was magnificent counselling, inspirational. I think I've told that story before, but it just comes up as an example of how inspiration, when you put aside all of your knowledge and all of your ideas and what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and actually follow this beautiful heart from peace, from stillness, from compassion, and when it comes up, you'll be amazed just how it works again and again and again. And not just it works for you to solve the problems of your life, but it gives meaning to other people in life. We get stuck so often in the problems of our life. We get stuck with ourselves. We get stuck with our depression, with our anxiety, with our fear. And how can we break out of that? Yeah, you can start thinking, oh, I shouldn't be afraid, I shouldn't be anxious, and of course you get more anxious. In Buddhism we call that double suffering. We're getting anxious about being anxious, we're afraid of fear, we're depressed at being depressed. And I think you all recognise what I'm saying there. And sometimes we need to do something which is a circuit breaker. And inspiration are those circuit breakers of life, because instead of getting into the head which creates all these scenarios which makes us feel depressed, we do something totally different. Someone is anxious, and very often they come up to me and they say, oh, you're so lucky being anxious. Well done. And I do that as a circuit breaker, because that's not what they're supposed to expect. Obviously, if you know me now, you expect me to say that. But by being a circuit breaker, and saying something which people don't expect, then they look upon it in a different way and they get inspired. What's wrong with being anxious? It's not against the 5 precepts, it's not against the law. And of course, what you're doing there is you're not encouraging being negative about anxiety. In other words, you're not feeding it anymore. A lot of those negativity is a lack of inspiration, a lack of mental energy, a lack of actually joy in just what's happening right now, a lack of uplifting the mind to a different level. It's amazing what happens when people just get inspired. And that's one of the reasons they come here on Friday evening. No, not maybe what I say. Sometimes when I ask people a couple of days after the talk, what did I talk about last night? The only thing they remember is the jokes, usually. But that's only the physical things they remember. But they go away with inspiration, hopefully. And that inspiration, that quality which you can't really sell or quantify, that you can feel in the heart, makes you a better person. And it gives you ways of solving the problems in your own life and in other people's lives which just come from deep within. And you can't tell a person what those problems are. When people come up to this place or you come to speak to me, I just can't answer your problems. All I can hope to do is not give you solutions, but actually to inspire you so that from the well of your own heart, then that sap of truth and of meaning and kindness can come up, and you find that is what solves the problems in life. And once you draw from that inspiration inside of you, now you'll find there's just so many problems can be solved. And it's not just solving them once, it's getting that wisdom, that kindness, that truth, which will solve problems once and again and again and again and again. And that's what I draw on. Don't draw on knowledge. You draw on being in this moment, being kind, tapping in just to inspiration. And that's why that sometimes that I was talking with one of my favourite rabbis last week. And he listens to these talks, so he knows what I'm talking about. And sometimes that being burdened or oppressed just with the hierarchy or with the dogma or just with the stiffness, of your religion, of your group. And I said, break out, be inspired. And take that inspiration of, you know what's true, you know what's right, you know what's love, you know what's kindness. And that's more important than any words in any holy book. That's where those words came from in the holy book. That's their source. The holy books, the words are secondary to what comes up from the heart. And you feel that inspiration from the heart. And you find that that is more truthful than anything else. And each one of you know that. And the whole purpose of this talk this evening is for you to know that, and more importantly, trust that. Because a lot of times people don't have the trust in their inspiration. Instead they trust the thoughts and the reasons, and they argue with themselves and they get themselves all sort of confused. Instead, feel it. Go for it. Follow your guts, except if you have chronic indigestion. That's just me being stupid. But no, just follow that and you'll always find it works out. And the truth of this is, go and see our monasteries, go and see our retreat centre, go to Dhammasara, see this place and how big it is. It's run on inspiration. That's its the source of its energy. That's how it works. That's how I work. And that's hopefully how you will work. Follow your inspiration. Trust it. It's much more profitable spiritually for you than anything else. So there we go. Didn't know what I was going to talk about 55 minutes ago. Now a whole talk. Inspiration. Thank you for listening.